This week on Lewis on the Law, I have yet another powerful and informative show for you. It's going to be a little bit different this week. This week, I'm going to take you inside a case, and we're going to look at the Hicks Preserve, a study in heirs property. I have the co-founders of the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve with me, Tom Jones and Laurell Jones, and we're about to get into it.
Welcome to Lewis on the Law.
You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I am your host this week and every week. And I have yet another powerful, informative show coming your way. This show is all about empowering you, the listener. And so for today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you inside a case. We're going to do a case study on heirs property. So I am really pleased to have with me Tom Jones and Laurell Jones. They're co-chairs of the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve. And the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve is dedicated to preserving a piece of what's now known as heirs property. Can you guys tell me a little bit about that?
Would love to, James. Well, actually, this initiative is about Charles and Polly Ann Hicks, who are historical figures in the Toombs County area of Georgia. And what makes it really interesting is that Polly Ann and Charles were born in the 1800s. In fact, Charles was born in 1838 and born a slave on a plantation there. And throughout his life, he was able to accumulate property that he left to his heirs, some of it through his military service and some of it through the hard work he did as a sharecropper.
Mm-hmm. And that gets to the heart of what we're talking about. And let me go ahead and define heirs property for our listeners out there. Heirs property is property that's been passed down at least one generation without clear title. A lot of times it goes from generation to generation. And when you look at heirs property, when you follow it back, it can be like a history, a time lesson. So heirs, this issue is really, really important because it is widespread, incredibly widespread, and it disproportionately affects disenfranchised portions of our population, people who don't have the means to go ahead. And though it may affect everyone, people who don't have the means are affected most harshly by it. And it has some serious negative consequences. We've seen in Katrina, people who didn't have title to their property weren't able to get government funding, get government assistance, and so their properties went untended. And this is a really serious issue. So tell me a little bit about Charles and Polly Ann Hicks.
Well, I'd be happy to. I was actually raised on the Hicks Preserve by my grandmother. She's a direct, one of the children of Charles and Polly Ann Hicks. And so he, in the late 1890s, moved to Toombs County, Georgia, and started a farm there and met and married my great-grandmother, Polly Ann, in 1900. And it's been so fascinating to go back and retract the records and see this history.
When you go back, it's like going back in time. I did a title search on property owned by my family. Mm-hmm. We went back to 1890 also. And it's fascinating because you can see how people lived, how people transferred property back then.
Exactly. And so I think he started out as a sharecropper. And then again, in 1900, they got married, and I actually went online and found their marriage license and what have you. That was so exciting.
Yeah, it's neat. It's neat going back. You can gain a picture of how this world was at the turn of the century. Very, very different place.
Exactly, and it just meant so much because this is a man that was born a slave, but he lived to be 102 years old. So that's why this all sort of came about. So in 1932. They actually purchased a sizable tract of land, about 62.25 acres. Charles and Polly Ann did. Mm-hmm. And what really fascinated me, this is right in the midst of the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. And they purchased that and clear deed and what have you. And it's just been great tracking it down. So 1938 went by, and then 1941, I think is when Charles passed away. But before all that happened, when they bought this tract of land, he dedicated a portion of it, about 2 acres, for a church, cemetery to bury the dead, and a school. They used the church for classroom space for colored children, so-called colored children back in those days.
Yeah,
and
that was when schools were, and that's what makes this study so fascinating. Because you can see how America evolved during this. Because at that time, schools were segregated. It was before Brown versus Board of Education.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. And so this was just so exciting. So me. And I guess I should back up and say there's a gentleman in our local area there, Andy Thompson, who was a local historian. Mm-hmm. And he had tons and tons of information about my family And I was sort of taken aback, but I was excited at the same time because one, why did he know so much, and me and my family members knew much at all, and two, wow, I was really proud to be a part of that. And so that's actually what got me here as well. And to grow up on that very property and to see his grave almost every day just inspired me to untangle this mess and all. And so, again, he died and passed away. He's buried in that cemetery that's on the land now. 1974, my great-grandmother, Polly Ann, passed away. I knew her. Knew her very well. I was 10, but seemed like I knew her longer than that. And so I guess a lot of it started when she passed away. So in 1975, the land, the 62 acres, were split up between their 6 children. And one of those children happened to be my grandmother who raised me, and that's why we ended up staying there.
And, okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, as we talk about both Charles and Polly Ann Hicks, I think some of their history that I would like folks to know, starting with, Charles, as we said, born a slave. He then went on to fight on both sides of the war during the war between the states, if you will.
He fought on both sides of the war?
Yes, he
really
did.
Interesting.
And we understand, I think he's the only man in the state of Georgia who actually did
crossed
that.
lines?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It will tell you how that came about.
Exactly. Well, so he followed his master's son because they actually had a close relationship. That was Lieutenant Hicks. And so that was how he ended up in the Confederate Army. Lieutenant Hicks was injured and returned to Georgia for a time to recuperate. In that time, Charles Hicks came and stayed in Georgia. And so the story is not quite clear if he was escaping from the plantation several years later or if he was going to actually rejoin his master's son. But at any rate, while he was traveling out of Toombs County, he came across General Sherman's army. And at that point, he actually enlisted in the Union Army and served there for 3 years.
Makes sense. He jumped ship. That's why I think this is so fascinating. It's like a history lesson.
It really is. And if I can interject one more thing, James.
No problem.
Now, his first slave, he actually was Charles Page. And then he was sold to the Hicks plantation and changed his name. And I understand they had a really, really close relationship. And now, only a couple of years ago, I realized my uncle's, my grandmother's brother's name is James Hicks. He named his son after his master's son. So they had a really close relationship and lasted there.
And I think especially among African American populations here in the South, if you actually do Heirs property search, you go back into a period where there was slavery and where society was segregated, and that's what we'll see. I mean, even in my own family, the Heirs property that was left to us, I mean, it was a Southern plantation, and it was a white-owned Southern plantation, and one of the women had a child by one of her sharecroppers, and the grandmother ended up taking the child in and eventually leaving the plantation to that child.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so it's fascinating the way you can go backwards in time and work through these issues.
And then I mentioned about his military time and him going to Gettysburg with his master. Well, I actually have pictures that we put together a website, and on that website,
and I know that language, master, is going to make a lot of people extremely uncomfortable. Here in Atlanta, it's
But that was the vernacular of the time.
That was the relationship. So I know that will make people uncomfortable. You listeners out there, I'm sorry, but we're getting into a period of time where, and when you look at Heirs property, you're going to go back through America and see how America has changed, how society has changed, and some of the consequences of that change.
It was a strain for me with some of the language, but I adapted it now and for the sake of this project.
Yeah, you guys are comfortable using that. I at least, around here, people would be like, what? What did you say?
Colored children and that sort of thing. But that was what was written. That's what we dug up, and that's sort of the way it is. And so I even have pictures of him on the website of him going back to the reunions. He went back for the 50th anniversary of Gettysburg. He went back for the 75th anniversary. And I have a group picture of him and some of his fellow veterans, some of his battle buddies, if you will, modern day language.
On the northern side or the Confederate side?
He would actually attend both reunions. He'd go for the Union and for the Confederate. So he didn't step away from either one of them. And on his grave now, he has a Confederate footstone. We wouldn't allow him to put a headstone. We have a stone marker. But there's a footstone there in commemoration of his time with the Confederate Army.
And I think that military connection is really important because, as I said, a lot of the military pension that he was able to draw, which was unusual at that point, but he was able to then take that money and capitalize that on that and use that with his own resources to then buy this land. So that connection is, I think, strong, and both Thomas and I are both retired military members, so that also captured our interest as well. The other thing that I think I would like our listeners to know is that Charles Hicks is one of the names that you would find if you go to D.C. to the African American Civil War Memorial. You will see him along with 2,900 or so others who served and are commemorated there.
And actually, I went to that.
I'm going to have to stop you guys right here. We're almost at the end of this segment. So you're listening to Lewis on the Law. When we get back, I'm here with Tom Jones and Laurell Jones. They're co-chairs of the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve. And we're talking about heirs property. I'm giving you an inside look at a case. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I have a exceptionally powerful show for you today because what we're doing today is a little bit different, and I'm taking you inside one of my cases. These are actual clients of mine, and heirs property issues actually forms a cornerstone of my practice. I did, and because heirs property, an issue in heirs property covers so much territory, unraveling an heirs property case will take you through probate actions. It'll take you through wills, trusts, intestate passings. It'll also take you through partition actions, clear title actions, almost any kind of property transaction you can think is tangled up in an heirs property case. So, a lot of my cases stem from issues that find themselves rooted in heirs property. And heirs property is an extremely important issue because we can see people lose their land when they don't have title to it, when they've been living on it for a long time. Maybe the land's been passed down from generation to generation. They can still lose their land, even when they're paying taxes on their land. There's a really famous case, Robinson versus the Estate of Heirs, where a person had owned the land for hundreds of years. A family had owned the land for hundreds of years, and somewhere way back when the guy Simon Pinckney took in a person and let them live on their property just because they were a child and they had no place to go. Mm-hmm. The child grew up. He wasn't actually related to the family. However, he took the Pinckney last name. He had kids. Their kids had kids. And next thing you know, they inhabited a large portion of the property. And then their kids started selling off property that wasn't theirs.
They got to do that?
They did what's called a quitclaim deed. And that just says whatever interest in the property I have goes to you. And so it may be that you're selling no interest, but it could be that you're selling something. Anyways, developers bought those quitclaim interests, and they started developing on that land. And finally, the actual relatives of the Pinckney family, they realized that someone's building condos on our land. And they sued in court to try and fight it. They're like, we've paid taxes for hundreds of years here on this property. And the court said, well, you've waited way too late. They've developed it out. There's a resort going up. There's swimming pools, tennis courts. And they lost their property, even though they'd had control of it for that whole entire time, because it did not have clear title. And that's just a small example. We won't get into the tons of examples that come with heirs property. Now, why don't you give them some way to contact the Hicks Preserve, the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve? Let's give them some information.
We actually have web presence now. We have a website. It's at www.thehickspreserve.org.
And you can go to thehickspreserve.org, and they've got it extremely well laid out. They'll take you through the history. Mm-hmm. You can see how the land's been held, who's been held, how the family tree goes through. And another thing I want to throw out, I have to do a legal disclaimer every now and then, but all the information in this case, in this show in particular, because I'm going to take you inside a case and basically show some ways or demonstrate some ways in which you resolve a complex land issue like heirs property. And heirs property is about as complex a land issue because it can involve every single type of land transaction that you can possibly think of can occur during an heirs property case. So all the information you hear on this show is only designed to be information. If you have a serious legal issue, you need to go ahead and contract with an attorney. You can actually contact me directly, and I can take you through an heirs property case. If you have property that does not have clear title and it's been left to you, there's all types of criteria, and we're going to get into those in a minute. But before we left off, you were saying that you went to the African American Civil War Memorial?
Sure. My grandmother was invited. She was one of the last standing heirs of Charles Hicks, and she was invited up for the unveiling of the African American Civil War Memorial in Washington, D.C. So we were there to witness that. That was in 98, I believe, 1998. And it was a great event. And to see his name inscribed on it really set my heart on fire as well. And that, again, I've had so much inspiration because he has such a story. And I would never live up to it myself, but I definitely want to keep his story alive. And that's part of what we're doing. And that case you mentioned, that's one of the things that I'm sharing with my family members now that I've discovered this, that we don't want anyone building condos on this property land, especially us, because we have a cemetery that's on that property as well. And lots of people have entrusted their loved ones to the Hicks family for preservation.
Generations, yeah.
And we owe that to not only our family but to others as well.
But more importantly, the Hicks Preserve is tied to the American Civil War. So there are deep roots here to a foundational issue that greatly shaped the way America is today. I mean, it's one of the events that single-handedly changed the way that we live and interact as Americans today.
Laurell is actually working on having it listed as a what do you say?
Right. Well, since Charles Hicks' gravesite is there, we are trying to work to have that designated as a national landmark because he is, in fact, we consider a national treasure. In addition to, obviously, being on this African American Civil War Memorial in Toombs County, the work that he did as well as his wife, we think he has earned that honor. And so that's one of the things we're working on in the future.
And this brings me to an important legal concept. And in some of my future shows, we're going to go through areas of law that I practice, and I'm going to introduce concepts that I want to introduce into Georgia jurisprudence. And some of these are recognized in other states, but they haven't made their way into the Georgia courts. And with any luck, I'll be able to start to introduce these concepts into the Georgia courts. And this concept is called personhood of property. And personhood of property, it's been recognized in Vermont, North Carolina touches around it. West Virginia has actually recognized it.
What is that?
It's when property is so closely linked to people. And I think the actual definition that the courts use was that objects become so related to personhood because they are the way that we constitute ourselves. I mean, the land itself, the objects themselves don't actually have a measure of value in money. That goes beyond just money. And here we're talking about the way people identify themselves, the way people constitute themselves, the way we relate to each other. I mean, you can say, and if you were raised in a household and, you left for a while and as an adult, you go back to your parents' house, you kind of see it. You kind of feel what I'm talking about. You're like, this is where I grew up. This is where I ran around and played with my sister. That's the tree where I fell and broke my leg. That is personhood of property. Yes. When the property becomes so attached to you that it becomes part of identity. And this is what gives heirs property that's been passed down from generation to generation, so many rights that it should be protected in a special way.
Indeed. We've done that. And I grew up out there, and some of the pictures that were on the wall then, we actually have those now, and they are on the website, pictures of them. And we're going to be keeping those on the grounds once we finish untangling this web. But those pictures are just so nostalgic, if you will, because I grew up seeing pictures of my great-grandparents. You were going to say?
Oh, no, when you talk about personhood and how closely tied Charles and Polly Ann Hicks are to that land, even after their passing, the community would still come and commemorate their memory at annual gatherings on that property. So that continued even after their death to be a part of the Toombs County history, even beyond the family.
And that's exactly what we're getting at. I mean, even the family that's in my land, it's called the Harriet Lewis estate, and Harriet Lewis was my great grandmother, and and so the name has been attached to the land. Matter of fact, I am named after the guy who first had clear title to our land, James Lewis. So when you look at the property deeds and things, it's like James Lewis. It was the last person who had clear title to that property, and so for me, it's like a wow, it's like a time machine a little bit.
I can only imagine, yes.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the land itself that you guys are trying to clear title to here, that's being held as heirs property. So where is it?
It's actually in Toombs County, Georgia, just outside of Lyons, about 2.5 miles outside of the city limits of Lyons, Georgia, down in the southeast, about 85 miles west of Savannah. It's not a large portion of land at all. It's about 10 acres total. That's all that's left, and this was tied up in the heirs property. About 8 acres is clear, and then 2 acres is the church and cemetery. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty much it was farmland, but now it's pretty much just grown up, and nothing can be done with it. It needs to be cleared and what have you, but we just want to preserve it and keep it. So
part of it is a church, and part of it is cemetery. Is it still an active church?
Actually, no. 1 year ago, in February of 2018, they suspended services due to lack of attendance, most of it through attrition. Mm-hmm. Most of the attendance members have passed away and what have you, or moved away because of different economical reasons or what have you, and it just didn't have the means of sustaining itself.
Okay. So the very first step, you know what? We're already at this show is going by really fast. I don't think we're going to cover half the ground we need to. So once again, give them some contact information for the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve.
Absolutely.
Yes. So the website is www.thehickspreserve.org. And on that, you'll obviously see the website that we've put together, which I think is a tool that even others can use to model and have as a template for their own creation of a website, including the history, FAQs, the land description, all of that information we found there. And for anyone listening to this show who's going through this issue, I think you should really tune into their website, because we're going to take this case in a very public journey on how a piece of heirs property is created. Once again, this show is designed only to give you information. I am trying to empower you, the listeners, with information that you might need to preserve for your case, issues that might really affect your case, what type of attorney you're looking for. You can kind of get that information here on this show. This show is not designed to replace the advice of an attorney. If you have a very serious legal issue, go ahead and contract with an attorney. If you have an issue that involves heirs property or any of the myriad of problems in property transference that is connected to heirs property, clear title actions, partition actions, probate actions, you can actually contact me. I handle all those specific issues. You can contact me at jameslewislegal.com. You can email me at james@jameslewislegal.com, or you can give me a phone call at 404-610-0075. When we get back, we're actually going to take a look at how you begin to solve or unravel this process. You are listening to Lewis on the Law, and I have yet another powerful and empowering show for you today, because today we're talking about an area of law that's really close to my heart. It's heirs property, and it's one of the reasons why I practice the type of law that I do. I actually was in law school one day, and an attorney who worked with the Georgia Appleseed Project, I know you guys ran across them, came in, and I was an urban fellow for the Center for Comparative Studies of Metropolitan Growth, and she started talking about heirs property, and when I heard that, I was thinking air, like the air you breathe, and I'm like, what in the world? This is going to be the world's most boring lecture. And she started talking about this property and how it had been passed from the 1800s, and I was like, oh my God, I have property like that in my family. I have, and it really connected with me. And so I started to really go into the issues on how to unravel an heirs property issue. And so I studied that for almost the second half of my law school career. I basically geared all my courses to how do you unravel a complex issue when property's been handed down for over 100 years, maybe close to 200 years without clear title. I mean, it becomes a mess at that point. So, and like I said, this case, if you follow their website,
be really invaluable to you because you're going to follow the process that a family takes to unravel an heirs property case. Why don't you give them some contact information for your website? Because I think it's going to be a great resource for all you listeners out there dealing with this issue.
Absolutely, because we also want to empower others to go on the journey that we're going on. And you can find information at www.thehickspreserve.org.
Excellent. So, clearing title. That's where we're at now. We're going to take the steps to clearing title. Okay, so for the very first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to figure out who has an interest in that property. So you're going to have to do a family tree, and that can get complicated, especially when when the property is over 100 years old, or maybe more than that, close to 200. So you guys did a family tree. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Well, I laugh when you say over 100 years.
First, how many heirs?
Well, I was going to say there's over 100 heirs actually.
Okay.
Involved. Now that we
over 100 heirs.
Over 100 heirs.
That's an incredible number.
It really is. And so go ahead, Dale.
Well, so, you talk about this family tree, which is a huge family tree. So what we started interviewing family members, particularly those in the area at Vidalia, right there near the property, to find out, who do you know as descendants. And so in addition to that interview, what we're doing is we're kind of building the family tree. We're developing a road show, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so we mentioned our website, the hickspreserve.org, which has a presentation that we've done. It's also an interview that we've done that's recorded so that individuals can listen to the story even before we make contact with them personally. So we're continuing to build this family tree. We're continuing to get contact information and trying to tell the story in a clear, coherent manner that stretches over 100 years. And so we're now taking this road show on the road. We were literally in Vidalia just yesterday, had a hugely successful meeting with the 5 descendants of Lily B. Jones, which is Thomas's grandmother. And so we talked to her children, including my mother-in-law and aunts and uncles. And all of those individuals signed the quitclaim deeds so that they have now signed over their nominal interest. And so that's the first 5, and so 95 plus to go. But we were really pleased to have the opportunity to get them on board with this initiative.
And what happened is, because I grew up out there, I knew all of the original descendants and most of their children. So I know someone in each branch of the tree, if you will. And I don't know all 100 or over 100 heirs, but I do know someone in each one of the families. And so we're using the as Laurell mentioned, who do you know concept to continue to build contacts and make contacts and get this information in front of them and ask them to do exactly what the other family members are doing now, and that's transferring their interest. I think is what you told me the term was.
And that is the second step. After you've identified all the heirs out there, go ahead and begin to consolidate the interest, and that's what they're doing through quitclaim deeds, and that's the easiest way. You can just go ahead and get people to quitclaim their interest over
to the Charles Hicks Preserve,
and that's an extremely important thing. Is who are they consolidating their interest to, or who are they assigning their interest to?
They're turning it over to the Charles and Polly and Hicks Preserve. It's an initiative, and that's going to become the collective owner.
And that's really important, because there's several ways in which a family can go ahead and orchestrate this, or how they can create an entity that will hold the land. One of the ways is a corporation, the method that you've chosen, and another way is a trust. And a corporation has a lot more flexibility than a trust does. A trust has an easier transition mechanism built within a trust. So there are different ways, and depending on the land's ultimate objective, there are different ways to hold this land. Now, so you guys have people basically quit claiming their interest to the trust. How's that going so far?
Actually, so far so good. We made our first contact again just yesterday, and those were again the closest people that some of them actually live on the grounds till today, and they were actually excited to do this because they now see the dangers of being powerless, and we are powerless when there's over 100 people owning anything. I tell people all the time: 2 people is a partnership, 3 people is a sinking ship, and we had over 100 and some odd, heirs there. We couldn't possibly protect ourselves, and we could end up losing it all. And so they were so excited to do their part, and help us to get the word out to other members of the family to do their part and do it in a timely manner, so that we're on your clock. We can get this taken care of in a most economical way as possible, and that's important to all of us.
And that goes to the next step, because you're going to because especially when you're dealing with 100+ heirs in a property, you're going to have some people who are not going to turn over their interest to you. I mean, that's you guys haven't quite got there yet.
We haven't.
But I'm going to tell you, because I've already been through this process, that is on the horizon. Especially when you're talking about 100+ people, not all of them are going to turn over their interest to you willingly.
Well, I've shared this, and I tell people, I said, I know that's true. That's human behavior, just basic. But I think I hope our case is a little different in that, one, we don't have anything to gain from it. There's no monetary value. I think it's priceless to hold on to what's left of their estate. Also, that cemetery is involved with it, and we owe that to not only our family but other members of the community. And so I think that our family is going to do it different. And as soon as they hear the story, I think they're going to do the right thing and ensure that we can maintain, preserve, and protect what was started and which so valuable to us now.
And I hope that your sales pitch is smooth enough. I had 7 members in my family.
Only 7?
Only 7, 7, and yet there was a 2-year long ordeal just to get everybody on the same page. And there's still that one crazy uncle who is not on the same.
That's
page.
not the Hicks clan. The Hickses don't. Do
you guys are much
way.
more reasonable.
The
than
Hickses do the right
huh?
thing.
Okay, you guys.
Because you look at it, Charles and Polly Ann did something very unusual and very selfless when they did this. And Charles Hicks got a pension back in those days. He could have thrown that money away. He could have did anything with it. And he decided to do something to cause generational wealth. Although we didn't do particularly probably what he had in mind, but they made some sacrifices. And now this is a small sacrifice for our family members to pay. I'm not a direct heir. But I think that anyone who sees this and has an opportunity to participate, I think they'll do what Hickses do. Okay.
And like I said, I admire your optimism, but that gets to step 3 in this process that I want to work people through, and that's the divestment of interest of the people who are not willing to go along.
Well, I'd be interested to hear that just in case.
yeah, just in case. So in Georgia law, you can demand an accounting from co-tenants. And if you have been paying the taxes on the property, go ahead and hit them with the bill for their share of property taxes that they haven't been paying for all these years.
Well, we're over $15,000 now in taxes, and I've actually been paying those taxes over the years just because we didn't want to lose it. There's been a couple of times when they posted signs on the county has about taxes due and auctioning it off and things of that nature. So we're over $15,000, and then the taxes are due for 2018 now. So I didn't know that was even an option.
Yeah, there isn't an option, and it's a demand for an accounting. We are already at the end of this segment. I've only gotten 3 steps into a huge and complicated legal process. So give them some contact information for the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve.
Sure, that's absolutely www.thehickspreserve.org. Thehickspreserve.org. There we find all our contact information and a wealth of information that we put together.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law, and this show in particular is going to sound like I'm giving you legal advice out there because I'm taking you through the steps on a legal issue. However, this is only designed to give you information. This is not designed to replace the advice of an attorney. If you haven't, I am an attorney, but I am only giving you information in this context. There's too many of you guys out there, and each situation is too different for you guys to take this as more than just a first step in your legal process. This will help you decide what type of issues, if you actually have a case, what type of things you need to preserve. All my old shows are preserved on my website. So you can go to my website. They're all archived there. I have the podcasts, which preserve all the shows. I have the video page, which preserves a lot of shows in a really nice, cool to look at video format. You can always contact me at jameslewislegal.com. You can email me at james@jameslewislegal.com, or you can give me a phone call at 404-610-0075. Once again, that's 404-610-0075. When we get back, we're going to get deeper into this process. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I have, once again, yet another super empowering and powerful program coming for you. We are talking about an area of law that actually has historical significance. We are talking about the area of law known as heirs property issues, and I guess it's not an area of law, but it's an issue in law called heirs property. And I have the co-founders of the Charles and Pollyann Hicks Preserve, Tom Jones and Laurell Jones, with me, and we're talking. And this show is a little bit different because with this show, I'm giving you an inside look into how you unravel an heirs property case. And we're not going to actually make it all the way through the unraveling here of a 100-plus-year-old case with 100-plus-year-old or 100-plus tenants in common with 100-plus different types of transactions that are going to have to occur before this is all said and done. But you can follow the action as it happens. They've got a really great website going, so you can follow the action as it happens on their website. You want to give them some the website information once again? Yes,
absolutely. As you start your own passion project, as we refer to this, we encourage you to join us at www.thehickspreserve.org.
And it will be a great resource because you can go there. You can link to me through there. You can link to other partners of theirs. I like
you can donate through there as well. We can help pay James.
Yeah, not only I'm not taking up all the money, but to help also pay because at the very end there are going to be legal actions that have to occur, and we're going to get into that a little bit. And the first. And it's not going to be the first thing, but one of the options here in the end game is once you've consolidated all the interest and you've divested all the interest that's required, you can go ahead and file a quiet title action. And a quiet title action basically allows basically says, all comers, and it's a quiet title against the world is the action that you would actually have to file. And the legal term is quia timid, and there's just a quia timid action, and there's a quia timid against all the world. And basically what you're going to have to do, because even though you're going to identify 100-plus heirs, there's going to be 5 or 6 that you're just not going to be able to find. You're not going to be able to identify. So you're going to have to post notices in a specific way, especially in Georgia. Georgia has a statute that actually governs how you'll have to notify people or how you'll have to post notice. And you'll have to pick a court date, and you'll have to invite all claimants to come in and make their claim in court.
Well, we definitely appreciate how you've been helping us to navigate this new course for us. This is also a very helpful resource.
And so we were talking about how property is held. So you can once you've combined interest, of course, you can do a trust or a corporation. Those are the 2 ways that I would throw out as advice to hold this property. When it's held as heirs property, the property is held as a tenancy in common. And in Georgia has defined heirs property, and it really helps when it's statutorily defined. During Katrina, we've talked about Katrina a little bit earlier. There was a huge issue. Heirs property really came to national attention. I think before Katrina, it was a little known thing, and the American Bar Association went and decided to begin the action of getting a uniform code. And the American Bar Association the organization that actually put together the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, but they actually put together an act called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property, and the act helped define what heirs property is and solidify a measure or a method that people can go ahead, that families can go ahead and begin to clear title to land that is so convoluted like this.
That's good to know. Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the Georgia Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, and that is the Partitioning Act and a lot of times you're going to want to file the quiet title action and the partition action at the same time. a lot of people are afraid of the partition action because they're afraid that an outside party can come in and buy the property once you put it up for partition sale. But in Georgia, the Georgia Act has provided a protection for that. It basically allows all the tenants, co-tenants, to buy the interest out in other tenants. So you're going to get notice, and you're going to get the option, and there's a whole time sequence for this. And let me see. Let me go ahead and break out the time sequence so I can get this right. And once again, I'm only giving you information. This is not legal advice, so do not rely on what you hear now, even though I am going to go through a statute with you. Don't rely on what you hear now. So the buyout option, the courts will notify the tenants, and they'll have 60 days in which to buy out the plaintiffs. And so the Georgia option will give a 45-day notice period and a 45-day notice period in which you can exercise that buyout option. Okay, so the courts will make a decision on the value of the property. There's going to be a really deep. There's a process here that the Georgia statute's already outlined. It's basically the courts will have to get impartial appraisers. The appraisers are going to have to appraise the property, and after the property has a fair market value, the courts are going to issue out a notice. And you're going to have 45 days in which you have to tell the court that I am going to go ahead and exercise this option to buy out the other interest in the properties. So in fundraising, it's really important that you have this end game in mind because it's really important that before you take the final steps in an heirs property issue, you want to understand how the partition action works. So you'll have 45 days in which to go ahead and exercise the option. And then after that, you'll have 60 days to go ahead and buy out your co-tenants. And the good thing about this is in Georgia, before the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, you had to be a tenant in common to force a partition action. And before the Heirs Property Act, people would own property as heirs property, but they're like, how am I even an owner? How do I have any rights to do anything? And so Georgia defined owners of heirs property as tenants in common. And so you guys already have standing to bring a partition action, believe it or not. So
that'll be a last resort.
It should be a last.
Yes.
Don't take this step without making sure that you've gone through all the other steps. And we haven't actually done, and this is why this show only, and I hesitate because this is my area, so I hesitate throwing this out there because people will think, oh, we heard James Lewis talk about it. This is his area of law, and we're going to take his advice and go ahead and do a partition action on our property. Don't do that. If you have if you're getting into this, go ahead and if you don't contact me, go ahead and contact the Georgia Heirs Property Law Center. They will be able to connect you with attorneys who deal in this area. And you want an attorney who's been through this and has some understanding of how to clear title in a complex title situation. So contact the Georgia Heirs Property Law Center. You can find them online. I don't actually have their website information, but if you go to my website, jameslewislegal.com, you can see all the old shows, and I have a great show with Joanne Johnson and Gendry Mander, and where we talk about heirs property. It's kind of an introduction show to this show where we get a little bit deeper into this action. So you don't want to do you don't want to do a partition action yet.
No, we'll do it the right way, the family way, the Hicks way.
Yeah, exactly. And so their website, you'll be able to donate on their website, and contrary to what was said, not all of it's going to attorney's fees. Most of it will actually be put in place to go ahead and clear title to this property, which might take some buying out of other people's interest who have been identified, and that is the last resort, because in that situation, you haven't divested them of their interest. They still have some interest in the property. They still don't want to turn it over to you. You still want to clear title to the property. So you force a partition action on the property, and they will have to go ahead and turn that over to you. So we're getting close to the end of our time, but not quite. So did you guys want to talk a little bit more about the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve? Is there anything else you want to say about it?
Well, I guess we might want to talk about some of our future plans for this, because
excellent.
This is a historic site that we're trying to obviously get identified as a historic landmark. but we also want to maybe use it because Georgia, as those of you who are listeners in this area, it's a beautiful area. We're here in Georgia in the springtime. It's fabulous. And so we want to use that property as a nature preserve, if you will. I mean, I see magnolias, I see rhododendron bushes, I see just a way to preserve nature and allow people to come out there and enjoy what the property is. And
that gets to another area or another type of way in which the land can be held and used, and that is for conservation use or establishing a conservation easement or allowing another company or group to have a conservation easement over the land. However, that is a show all in itself. So I just wanted to throw that out. And once again, I got to throw this disclaimer out because I've only given you not even half the information. We've only gone through half of this outline, and that was only going to give you a quarter of the information necessary to actually clear title to a convoluted process like heirs property. So once again, give them some contact information for you guys.
Sure, that's www.thehickspreserve.org. That's www.thehickspreserve.org.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. This show went by really fast. I didn't get to half the things that I wanted to talk about, but that's the way it is when you're having fun. Who knew that the law could be fun, interesting, and exciting?
Thank you for that.
I know. You didn't know that, did you?
I did not.
Yeah. Exactly.
Never has in the past.
I know, right? People are like, lawyers are old, staid, and boring, and it's fun, exciting, interesting, and impactful.
And we've enjoyed sharing this story. We absolutely want the world to know about the story of my great-grandparents, Charles and Polly Ann Hicks.
Thanks. Yeah. And so I would like to thank Tom Jones, Laurell Jones, co-chairs of the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve, for coming on air and talking about this extremely important issue with me. Once again, I would like to thank the guys who make the miracle happen, the soothsayer of sound over here, Sam Davis, pushing the buttons, making the knobs work. The villain of video over there, Anthony Cook. He's sitting there smiling, very smug. I had a great time, you guys. And next week, I have the director of the Georgia Lawyers for the Arts coming on, and he's going to talk about intellectual property issues for startups.